Hello, everyone. I am Jo Flick with the Montana State Library. I am facilitating today's Webside chat. And I'm here with both Jennie Stapp and Tracy Cooks, who are kind of leading the charge on today's topic. So let me give you just a couple of updates as we get started. All of these Webside chats are recorded, so if you're ever not able to attend, they are usually posted within a couple hours. I have a couple little technical things I have to do with the recording. And you can also view these recordings with automated captions. So if that's a preference of yours, you can do that as well. And you should know that the State Library is planning, for the first time in quite a few years, a Public Library Directors Institute. And this will be June 8th, 9th, and 10th. Actually, we've just confirmed that we won't be staying over until the 11th. So I apologize for that little typo there. We'll be at the Ursuline Center in Great Falls. There's no charge to attend. Of course, your rooms and meals will be provided. We've hired Andrew Sanderbeck, and he's going to be the facilitator. We're really working on building collaboration and kinship and identifying the next big collaborative opportunities for public libraries in Montana, maybe one big opportunity or a few small ones. And so it should be a really good event to plan to attend. And registration, now we're planning to open registration on March 2nd. Right now, just working with our folks in at the State Library to put that registration form together. So be sure to put that on your agenda. And then today, our plan is to, Jennie did have a commission meeting this week, so we'll get a brief update on that. But most of our time will be spent on the Public Library Standards revision, what the task force has been doing, and Tracy has lots to report there. So Jennie, you want to take it away?
You bet. And I'll just add a quick update about the Directors Institute. We're also planning the June commission meeting to coincide with that event. It will also be at the Ursuline Center there in Great Falls. So it'll be a great chance for library directors and the commission to have a chance to interact together.
And anybody can attend that as well. So it'll be a public meeting. And so even if you're not coming to the Public Library Directors Institute because you're not a director or for some other reason, you can always come in for that.
Great. Thanks, Jo. So as Jo said, the commission did have their February commission meeting. In terms of the amount of content on the agenda, it was a little bit light, but we had a couple of important topics to discuss. One of the things that I'm really excited about, and hopefully by maybe our April website chat, we'll be able to have some information for you online. The State Library is really working hard to implement a reporting dashboard. You've heard us talk now for several years about how we use data to help with our planning and evaluation, and we've really sort of taken some halting steps for the last couple of years in how we do our overall reporting. But with hiring Jessica Edwards as our data coordinator, we've recently taken some big leaps forward in how we consistently are collecting data around the different projects and work we have going on at the State Library. And we'll be using that data to help develop a reporting dashboard so that we can continue to be really transparent, not only in what we share with you about our work, but in using that information to help plan for how we can best use our resources to deliver great services to all of you. So in our reporting materials right now, what we have are some static documents on the commission page that are built out of a system called Tableau. That system can be used to drive a dynamic web interface dashboard that we're hoping to get implemented in time for the April commission meeting. So I'm looking forward to really highlighting and sharing that with all of you. The other significant action that the commission took at their commission meeting was to approve a proposal that's going to change how we administer our Montana Natural Heritage Program. For those of you who are familiar with that program, it's one that manages Montana's plants, animals, and habitat data. And ever since the program was created in the mid-1980s, the State Library has always contracted for its administration, first through the Nature Conservancy, and since 2006 through the University of Montana. And we've really sort of taken the last 6 months or so to think about why we contract for the administration of the program, what the benefits are, what some of the concerns are, and how we can really take steps to ensure the stable future of that programming. It's a fantastic program. They manage a significant amount of really important data. I'm sure some of you are familiar with and have used things like the Montana Field Guide that has just fantastic information about Montana's plants, animals, and habitats. But the funding for that program has not been able to keep pace with the needs of the program, and they've been in a situation where they've seen their funding decline over a number of years. And so over the last 6 months, we've really looked hard at different kinds of models for the administration. And on Wednesday, the Commission approved a kind of a little bit more collaborative model where the State Library itself will directly administer the information services component of the Montana Heritage Program, and we will be responsible for its strategic planning and future direction. We'll continue to partner with not only the University of Montana, but we hope the entire university system to continue to garner grants and contracts that will allow the program to continue to do its research-based work, including field work that they do to collect observation information that goes into informing their various databases, including the Montana Field Guide. So it's going to be a fairly significant change in how the program's administered, but the actual work of the program really shouldn't change. We hope to continue to see more efficient delivery of their great information products, and more and better resources to continue to develop more data and to develop great research products that come from that data. So on the front end, from what our patrons and our partners see, we don't believe that you'll really see any significant change. But on the back end, we know that there'll be these administrative changes. The next step for us is to negotiate an agreement with the broader university system through the Office of the Commission of Higher Ed that will allow us to work more collaboratively with, again, not just the University of Montana, but with the wider Montana university system. So we're looking forward to those changes, and we'll be talking more with staff about what that means for all of us going forward. And again, look forward to just continuing to deliver really high quality information about our Montana's natural resources. I did want to make a couple of other announcements. We have received our FY20 Library Services Technology Act Award. Those are the federal funds that we receive from the Institute for Museum and Library Services that fund the library development work that we do here at the State Library. And thankfully, we received a significant increase in that funding award for this coming fiscal year. In FY19, our award was $1,088,000. For FY20, our award is going to increase to $1,202,000. So it's a little over a 10% increase in funding. And that's the first significant funding increase we've received in our LSTA funding in well over a decade. Of course, the President's budget again calls for eliminating IMLS, and we know that based on actions we've seen in the last several years, that's probably more a political statement. It's probably not going to result in anything real or significant, but it is an opportunity, and there's an ongoing need for us to continue to advocate for IMLS and for LSTA, and for us to talk about the great work that we do with that LSTA funding to really raise all boats in Montana and to ensure that all Montana libraries and Montanans benefit through quality library services. with regard to the increase that we're seeing now, we're going to be working with state library staff and the Network Advisory Council over the next several months to prioritize how we think we should spend those increased dollars. And ultimately, then the State Library Commission, when they approve our budget for next fiscal year, will approve a plan for how we spend those increases. So I just want to put a plug in for the Network Advisory Council and say, be sure to reach out to your representatives on the Advisory Council if you have thoughts and ideas about the priorities of work to support library development. We'll certainly be asking Network Advisory Council members to reach out to all of you as well, so that we can make sure that we get feedback from all of you about how we might spend those increased dollars. I'm going to pause and ask if there's any questions about that.
Feel free to unmute your mic or use the chat box for your comments and questions, and I will read those out loud so that the people who are viewing the recording actually get the benefit of discussion going on in the chat box. So far, none so far.
And then just the final update before we start talking about public library standards is in regard to the interim study that's looking at the state library's overall funding and budget. We continue to have very positive communication with the Legislative Finance and Education interim committees, subcommittees that are looking at House Bill 633. We've had 2 meetings with that subcommittee, as well as follow-up meetings with representatives, legislative representatives, and legislative staff. The next meeting of that subcommittee will be in mid-March, on March 18th and 19th. And we've sort of taken a bold approach in our ask. We've asked for what would amount to almost a tripling of the state library's overall budget. And then we've proposed 8 to 10 different kinds of funding sources that the legislature could potentially look to generate enough revenue to fund that kind of budget. And we haven't met much resistance at this point. I'm sure at some point we will, and I'm sure at some point we won't get everything that we've asked for. But for now, it seems very encouraging that as long as we are proposing a reasonable budget with reasonable requests and potential funding sources to fund those requests, that the legislature seems to be on board with continuing that kind of conversation. So I look forward to seeing where this will go. There'll be more information at the April Commission meeting, including some specifics about the kinds of budget priorities that we're talking about. I can tell you we've included in that budget line items for things like funding for broadband to Montana libraries, more specific funding for various statewide projects, including the Montana Shared Catalog. So some potential funding there to help offset some costs that libraries currently face, and opportunities for us to continue to grow the kinds of collaborative statewide projects that we have in place. So I hope you'll think about attending or watching the State Library Commission meeting in April. It will be at the Montana Library Association conference, where we review those kinds of budget details in more detail and talk more about the work of the subcommittee. So I do want to spend the majority of our website chat today talking about the update to the public library standards. We've talked about this a little bit in past website chats, and that work is really starting to come to fruition. As all of you who are public librarians know, in order to qualify for state funding, libraries have to meet the public library standards, which exist in Montana Administrative Rule. And the state aid legislation says that libraries have to meet those standards in order to receive their state aid. And the current standards were passed in about 2010. So it's been about a decade since we last looked at the standards. And in that time, of course, we know that the work of libraries has significantly changed. We've really taken a focus on turning outward, understanding our community's needs, and sorry, I have a phone ringing and I don't know who it is. I'm going to hang up on him. There we go. Again, I was saying that the work of libraries is really to turn outward, to really think about the needs of our communities and how libraries can respond to those community needs, how libraries can really become community anchors and community catalysts. When you look at the current public library standards, you'll see that they're much more inward focused. They're focused on more traditional library services and the traditional work of libraries. And the other thing that you'll notice about the standards is that they're not really impact driven. They don't speak to the kinds of outcomes that we want to see from library services. They speak more towards the resources and the inputs that go into providing those kinds of library services. So we've undertaken an effort to rewrite those standards to really articulate what the role of libraries is in the 21st century, to articulate that the work is focused on our communities, and to document that kind of information in a way that really shows the impact of library services. We started this effort really about a year ago by researching standards that exist in other states. And then last summer, we sat a task force of librarians. We have library representation from different sizes of public libraries as well as each federation. And they've worked very, very hard with Tracy to take really a fresh look at the overall standards themselves. And I'm hoping, can we bring up the Public Library Standards Task Force page so people can see where this information is located? It's, if you go to MSL.
Oh, Tracy, I was going to see if Tracy might have that up, and I'll just screen share.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, Tracy,
good, perfect.
I'm going to make you the presenter.
Excellent.
As soon as I can find you. There you are.
All right.
We see it.
And I started at the State Library's main page so people could see exactly
Perfect.
how to get to it.
How to get there.
All right, Jenny, go ahead.
I'm gonna ask Tracy to kind of walk us through the standards in just a minute, but I wanted to first let you know how to find information about who is serving on that task force. You can see on this page the charge to the task force, and then where we are in the overall process for adopting the standards. It may sound like we're sort of a long ways down this road, but really we're at the very beginning of a significant public comment process now that we have some draft standards for the library community to react to. The Commission saw the work of the task force on Wednesday, and with their blessing, we're taking the next step to start talking about these standards more publicly. I do know that they've been shared via Wired in some public meeting announcements for the task force. So some of you have had a chance to see early drafts and comment on early drafts already. As I was saying, we're at the beginning of a public comment period that will go through the Federation meetings this spring. We're going to talk about the standards at each of those Federation meetings, and then we're also going to discuss them with the Commission at the Conversations with Commission at the Montana Library Association Conference. That session is on Thursday morning, first thing. Based on the feedback during this initial public comment period, we'll ask the task force to review and evaluate the comments that have been received and to make any necessary revisions. Those revisions will then go back to the Commission. And if the Commission is satisfied with the draft, they will then move the standards into an administrative rules process. As I said, these standards exist in Montana's administrative rules. They have the legal weight of administrative rule. And the administrative rules process also involves a significant public comment period, including possibly public hearings if there's enough people who comment and want to have open public hearings. And then depending on the outcome of that comment period, there may be a need for additional revision and additional comments before the commission ultimately, hopefully, adopts the new standards either at their October or their December commission meetings. And then from there, the standards themselves won't go into effect until July of 2021, and libraries, the first time they would need to report that they meet the standards is the certification period in 2022. So there's a lengthy adoption period for adopting the new standards. And then, of course, as exists with the current public library standards, any library that's currently working on meeting the new standards will have the opportunity to submit deferral requests and a plan for how they might meet any of the new standards that they don't meet when they certify in 2022. So it's a long, lengthy process that we're in, and this is the first time we're really talking about the standards in a public way, and really look forward to getting input from all of you. The other point I wanted to make before I turn things over to Tracy is to say that right now, under current law and in the administrative rules, there isn't an opportunity for tribal libraries to benefit from state aid funding, even though we know many of the tribal college libraries provide community library services in their communities. If the tribal libraries are interested, we hope to include them to the extent possible in the standards. And we've begun a conversation with the Montana Library Association about allowing for tribal college libraries to benefit from state aid. That would be something that we could potentially add to the state aid legislation when that legislation comes up for reauthorization in 2023. And so the state library is also working to communicate with the tribal college librarians as well as their public library counterparts in their communities to talk about how these standards might apply to their work in their communities, and whether or not there's an interest in opening up the standards and the state aid to serve tribal college libraries. So again, I'm gonna stop there and ask if there's any questions, and then turn things over to Tracy. And I thought we could just do kind of a high-level walkthrough of the differences between the essential and excellent standards that are being proposed and the survey tools that the task force and Tracy have developed.
So there aren't any comments in the chat box. Anyone else have any questions right now or comments?
And I just want to thank Megan Glidden. Megan is one of the task force members, and she's joined us here today. And I welcome any comments or feedback from her about the standards and the process that we've gone through.
You're welcome. It's been a really interesting process to be part of it, and I'm excited to see how it all comes together.
All right, I will jump in then with an overview. I'm actually first going to click on the links to the committee members, and I kind of want to thank them. This was very hard work, and I wish more librarians could have heard how deeply they thought about all of the current standards and what was important to keep and what was important to let go of, and and what really needed to happen to make the proposed revision stronger. You know, they really added a lot to the process, and I think we're really doing their best to kind of challenge libraries to the next step, but also maybe try not to push too hard. And I know one of the questions that we have, and when I say we, I mean myself and the task force and other state library staff members, is we definitely want your feedback on the standards, and you know, whether or not you think that we push too hard. You know, are they just unattainable, or are they actually a good set of standards? That's very useful for us to know, and in particular, if maybe we did push too hard, why and what kind of support would you need for them to become a reality? So as Jenny mentioned, you're going to see multiple drafts on here. The very first one, this proposed changes, this is probably the one document that lists everything together. And administrative rules are a legal document. They're part of the body of law within Montana. And so this document is actually mostly written in the format it would go into administrative rules. And this is where you can go to just basically see each standard. The task force made the decision to do away with the 3 levels of standards that we have currently. They're recommending that instead of essential, enhanced, and excellent, we have only essential and excellent. But as they are currently handled, libraries would just need to meet the essential standards. The excellent standards would be ones for libraries to strive for. The task force spent a lot of time talking about the importance of library boards. And so in particular, I would be very interested in hearing from librarians. One particularly valuable piece of feedback that a state library commissioner gave this Wednesday was some deep concerns about the additional standard of at least one board member is certified by the Montana State Library, which is this one right here. You know, she pointed out that this could put a lot of responsibility on librarians. Bruce Newell, who served on the commission, kind of carried forward the task force's perspective that they added this because what some of the librarians have found is when they do have a board member who's certified, they bring such energy and presence to the board, and that actually helps the library in the long run. But that is a particular standard that we are very interested in hearing from you about what you think of that and what the consequences might be for you, what your concerns are, or what you like about it. The other standard on here that has gotten quite a bit of discussion is one we put in about salaries, which I'm going to kind of head down to now. And we are aware that some librarians are really underpaid for the amount of work that they are expected to do. And so the task force wanted to do their best to try and address that standard. And so they added an essential standard of the library offering a competitive enough compensation package to attract and retain high quality staff. We struggled a lot with the wording of this one because we're trying to be supportive of the idea of librarians being paid better, but also not taking away local control, and also just recognizing that this would be a very challenging standard for some of you to meet. For some of you, you might feel okay with this one and that you've addressed it, but for others, this could be a bit of a stretch. So those were 2 standards that have gotten quite a bit of conversation within the task force and already within public comment. So I wanted to point those out as well, but I do encourage you to look at all of them and let us know if there are others that you think this is too much of a stretch, and here's what you maybe would propose instead, or how you think we would need to address it in order for your library to be able to meet that standard. So I'll head back now to the survey tool. So the survey tools are actually designed to be kind of the library development tool. You know, as we talked a lot about the standards and what we wanted them to do, we sort of likened them to a mentor or a coach who's like trying to basically encourage the best. And we also were tying these standards to the Fair Library Access Resolution that the Commission adopted recently, where basically all Montanans receive library services sufficient unto their needs. And so you see that language reflected particularly in the survey tool. I created this for a couple of reasons. One was to communicate the purpose of the standards and to be able to use that outcome impact-driven model that Jenny was talking about, but also because I would have people ask questions, really good questions about, well, what does that standard mean? And so this tool is one you would see that you have these interpretive questions that allow you to understand what the task force meant by that standard. And they wanted this as a library development tool, but also because one of their complaints about the current public library standards was sometimes it was really unclear. You know, you were just sort of checking yes, but did your library truly meet that standard? A lot of these interpretive questions came out of me listening to the task force members, me thinking about some of the best practices I've seen in Montana libraries, and then also some of the work I saw when I was reviewing what other state libraries have done. So we have both the essential and the excellent standards in this kind of survey tool that you can take a look at to give you a sense of what the task force was thinking of when they suggested that standard. The final piece to this that I would mention that we had a good conversation about was this idea that some of these standards, take the salary one for instance, or even perhaps the board member being certified, could be challenging to address. And you might need more than the current 3-year period of time. So one of the things we did was within the deferrals recognizing that some of these standards, particularly ones tied to the library needing to increase its financial resources, might take you longer than 3 years. And if that was the case, then you would work with state library staff and the state librarian would decide what was an acceptable amount of time in which you could meet that standard. And then the state librarian could grant you a 1-year extension if you could not meet it within, say, that 4-year period or whatever it was. I guess the final and last piece I would mention that we've added in here that is quite different is we have included what we called a stretch standard, and we really struggled with this one as well. We had a lot of discussion about it. And the idea is that you would go through the excellent standards and you would identify one excellent standard that you wanted to work towards. And you would identify how you would try to achieve that standard. And the idea, again, was just kind of a trust and faith that most Montana librarians are pretty into excellence. And this was an opportunity for us to encourage you to kind of go for the stars, so to speak. We're kind of well aware that state library staff are going to have to step up and really give you the support that you need. And so as you look at these, again, what I'm really wanting to know is which ones are just too much, which ones are you going to need help with, and how are you going to need that help? Those are the kinds of questions, if you could answer them for us, would really help us make sure that we get that sweet spot of the standards pushing, but not pushing so hard they're unachievable. You know, Megan, Jenny, or Kara, all of you kind of served on the task force. Is there anything you would like to add to this?
Well, first, I want to really thank Tracy for doing such a fantastic job shepherding all of this work. It's not easy to get the kinds of feedback that was necessary to really craft the draft of the standards that we have today. She put so much time and really careful thought into that process, so she deserves a huge amount of thanks. I really just want to echo and reiterate the point that Tracy made about the fact that we recognize that we at the State Library are in partnership with all of you in helping to meet these standards. Standards aren't something that allow libraries to be complacent in our library services. That's not what our users need from us. That's not what our users demand from us. We need to be constantly evaluating how we can improve our overall services. And we think if we are successful in crafting good library standards, that they should continue to push us to continue to offer the best possible services to, as Tracy said, provide services sufficient to meet Montanans' information needs. But we are in partnership with all of you in helping to achieve that goal. So I don't want libraries to be scared of these standards. I hope that they maybe push you a little bit out of your comfort zone, but know that we're right there with you.
So I'm keeping an eye on the chat box, but so be sure to just use that if you have anything you'd like to add.
And this is Megan, and I'll just chime in and say that I think Tracy captures it accurately when she says we struggled with some things and we had some really good conversations, and I think it was excellent to have the group that we did have to represent different perspectives, and so that we could hear some ways that it might affect libraries in practical ways. So so I hope that and I think Tracy has done a really wonderful job capturing all that and putting it together, because it's not an easy task.
This is Nancy with the Wadsworth Library. I've voiced several concerns to Tracy already about these new standards. Still looking at what I've seen on the screen, I do believe you are going to make it very difficult for one-person libraries to meet these standards and to be able to achieve the stretched standards, even to try and address. Like salaries, we have no control over our salaries. I'm a county employee. The county has total control over that. And the difficulty we have with the county as far as money and whatnot has gone a long ways. We've discussed board member certification at quite a few of our Pathfinder meetings, and not all the libraries, but most of them, I think, find trying to get even one board member certified is very difficult in these small communities. I just think you guys are pushing the small library, and that's what the perspective I'm coming from, is a small one-person library. I do believe you are pushing us extremely hard to achieve some of these standards.
Thanks, Nancy. I wanted to read a comment from Val Landeron, and I'm probably messing up her last name, but she's pointing out or asking a question related to Nancy's comments about the trustee certification requirement. Would the board members' certification requirements be the same? This would be a lot to ask of volunteers and perhaps a financial burden to the libraries. Thank you, Val. Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you both. I was taking notes, actually. In answer to your question, Val, currently, and we would not change this, I don't believe, the requirement is 15 CE credits. So 1 CE credit is basically equivalent of 1 hour of time earned in a 4-year period. That's what the trustees would need to do to become certified. That's a very good question. Are there any other questions or comments? This is kind of our time to just listen to what you have to say and take lots of notes and think about it.
So who's going to approve these standards? I mean, we've sat here, I've expressed my concerns several times. I really believe you guys, and I don't know who's going to approve these, but I don't really believe anybody's really listening to the people with the boots on the ground.
Well, I'm sorry you feel that way, Nancy. This is definitely at the beginning of the process. You know, I think we will change things as needed. As Jenny mentioned, this is the beginning of several months of public comment. And when this was done 10 years ago, we made changes to the draft that was proposed. It's the State Library Commission that would approve any changes. Did you want to add anything, Jenny?
Just reiterating what you were going to say, Tracy, Nancy, that it is the State Library Commission that ultimately adopts these standards. As I said earlier, we're at the beginning of a public comment period where we'll be taking your feedback and working on a revised draft for the commission at their June commission meeting. So it's at that point that they would see sort of a next revision of the standards. And then there's another public comment period after that. So there's lots of time for the public comment to come into play and for revisions to occur. So what you're seeing today certainly isn't a final draft. We are going to be putting online a public comment form to help collect that kind of information. And the more specific that you can be and maybe recommend some suggested language to help, the more effective we will be in thinking about how we can make positive revisions to those standards. And I know this is new news for even Tracy, because I was just talking about it with Jessica this morning, but we're going to be developing an online tool that will be linked from the pages that you're looking at now to help you submit that kind of feedback. And we're looking to have that tool online by the middle of March when we kick off the Federation meetings. So we hope that that will be a useful and effective tool for you to give us concrete feedback and for us to then take that data and your resulting comments and to make really positive revisions to the standards as we go forward.
We do have a new comment in the chat box I'd like to read, and it's from Monica Weigert. The standards are meant to help libraries become better, so even though the new standards may seem daunting, would it not be best to approach them with enthusiasm? And that's a question mark at the end. Thank you, Monica.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments or concerns? Anything that jumps out at you? I would be curious, I guess kind of have a question for the group, thinking about the way that trustee certification, I think, has caused one of the areas where it has caused a lot of stress and concern. Is there any value in some kind of requirement that rather than be certified, board members take some continuing education? Like maybe it's not the full 15 hours, but you know, what if they just took one CE every other year or every year or something like that, instead of it being that full certification process? Is there value in that to you? And would that also be a huge stretch?
So are you talking about like every board member or just like one or two of the board?
You know, I'm not really sure. I mean, if we're only talking like one CE, you know, I do think it would be very, very difficult to get every board member. I've seen 2 or 3 board members, though, usually, like a majority of the board, in one form or another at different CE events around the state.
For example, in the past, we've created a library board training video to talk about the different services of the Montana Library Association and the Montana State Library and that kind of thing. A way for a library to have their board members complete some CE would be to show that video at a board meeting, and in that way have the board members earn an hour or so of CE in a year.
And there is an additional comment from Colleen up in Harlem. I think this is the comment, I think 1 CE per year would work, and it could be done as a meeting via webinar or video. That's true. It's not a requirement to travel necessarily, but to use some of the online tools. And I could see where this particular, I'm just listening in as your CE coordinator and saying, well, if we had this this particular standard, that would kind of indicate to me in my job that I would need to make sure that there was training available that trustees could do as part of their regular meeting back at their library without having to travel, so they wouldn't have that burden.
There are also state library staff who can do on-site trainings. I was just trying to capture, what the task force, I think, really wanted with this one was just the realization that what libraries who do have board members who've attended a CE or training, they just feel like that board member's so much more supportive, that the board member seems to be getting more out of their experience of serving on the board. And so if the concern is just the full level of being certified, then maybe that's too much of a push. But is it okay to ask of board members that they do receive some CE training in a year, either via video or webinar or in person?
Just giving people a little time to type here. So if you're listening into the recording, I'm just kind of jumping here to let you know that nothing's wrong, that we're quiet, we're just waiting. Sometimes it takes people a little bit of time to type. I'm sure there'll be a lot more discussion about this since it is a brand new sort of area of standard, something specific like this. So stay tuned. I'm not seeing any more comments come in. Oh, wait a second. One more additional one from Colleen up in Harlem. Also, board members who are trained in the basics of what it means to serve on a board would be beneficial to both the library and the director. Thank you, Colleen.
Does this draft, because I haven't seen the drafts other than what Tracy sent out that one day, does it still contain the statement that when the library is open, a paid staff member has to be on site?
We reworded it. We said
Okay.
during open hours, paid staff are available to assist users.
So what about us one-person libraries where we can't always get a paid staff person because we are the paid staff person? Like, as I mentioned to you, Gladys and Belt, she uses volunteers extensively when she has to go to meetings. I have used volunteers when I can't, for one-person libraries to say that a paid staff member, you're really, I guess we'll just have to close all the times that we have to be gone. So that's not helping our patrons when basically your one-person libraries, it's vital for those libraries to be open for our patrons because they really need us.
I think one other way to think about it would be to think about having paid substitutes when the library director can't be there.
Well, then there's a problem too, because we have a problem with the county on doing things like that. And we have a very difficult problem getting somebody as a paid substitute because essentially they have to have another job, or it's somebody that doesn't need the job, which I found here. Jackie went for years without anybody because she couldn't find anybody. I went for several different instances where there was no paid substitute. And then when I did get a paid substitute, it was one person that applied. Fortunately, I had vetted both people, so I knew that they would be capable. But we ran into a considerable roadblock with the county is probably my best way to put this, because the county is, well, I'm glad Gladys now has a paid substitute. I'm glad. But, you know, one people libraries, we use volunteers at times. And so I kind of think you're stretching it for us.
One of the points that was made during the commission meeting when the commission looked at this on Wednesday was that this does stretch libraries, and it does stretch libraries and county commissions as well. And we have a great commissioner right now, Jamie Doggett, who's been a county commissioner in a small rural county, Marr County. So her advice and feedback to us is to make sure that librarians recognize the opportunity that these standards make to engage with their commissioners, to talk about the important work that libraries do, and that libraries have to meet these standards, and to continue to engage county commissioners that way. And again, that works not just on the libraries, but on the state library staff as well.
The task force did talk about this one, and you know, I guess one thought they had, Nancy, that I would share with you is they were thinking, you know, is this something that you just sometimes need to do once or twice a year, rather than is it something that you have to do, you know, 10% of the time or so forth. And I'm not sure where you're at in that. It sounds like for you, you could meet the paid staff are present 90% of the time, which is what the current public library standard is, but anything beyond that you feel is not possible. You need volunteers about 10% of the time.
Well, you're right. Most of the time, you know, there are no problems. But, you know, I had my paid substitute just up and quit on me. I went for quite a few months without anybody. Several times I just closed the library and I got approval by the board when we did not have anybody to take my place. You know, you just don't get anybody to come in here and do this job, even as a substitute. For the most part, you know, yeah, I come to work every day. So, and I don't even really take vacations. You know, I take a day here and I take a day there. As a I mean, my patrons, like it or not, they demand that I be here. I have people call up and say, so are you going to work today? Because then we need to come in and get some help. So, I mean, it's a whole different ball game when it's just one person. I mean, even two people that work at a library, I see a difference in how everything is run. I'm just trying to speak up for the one person, the very small libraries. And I know there aren't a lot of them, but they're just as important as anybody larger than us.
Yeah, the task force really struggled a lot with that one. And I can tell you the concern that multiple task force members kind of worried about, and that was they didn't at all want to give the perception that they were lessening library services for any communities in Montana, which they're not. I mean, one-person libraries actually give an incredible amount of customer service that sometimes you can't even get in a larger library just because you know everyone that's walking through that door. So I'm probably not saying this very well, but what the task force was trying to do was set a base level of standards where it didn't matter where you live in Montana. You knew you could count on this from your public library. But it's definitely worth making note of. And there, as you say, there aren't a lot of you. So maybe it's worth reaching out to those one-person libraries and saying, if we go to paid staff 100% of the time, basically, other than just emergencies here or there, is that doable? Or do we need to go back to that 90% of time? It's certainly worth asking. Because it wasn't the intent of the task force to put a hardship on it. They were just trying to ensure that every community got a certain level of services. Are there any other standards that we need to take a closer look at and get more feedback on?
Again, I encourage you to take a look at these online, to attend your Federation meetings, to join us at the Conversations with Commission at MLA, attend that June Commission meeting, and look for an online survey tool coming around mid-March to start collecting more feedback from you.
And this is Jo again, just to wrap up our website chat today because we are nearing the end of our scheduled hour. Thank you everyone for your participation. And I know that Tracy and Jennie that there will be many other opportunities to make comments. And for some of you, maybe this is the first time you've actually gotten a look at the proposed revisions. So you can certainly take these back to the rest of your library community, your library board, and prepare your feedback. That would be most appreciated. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording, but we will stay here online for just a little bit longer in case anyone else has anything else they want to say or discuss. So thanks. Thanks, Jennie. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, Megan.